Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyau Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Sarvastaratu Durgani, Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu, Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
On the last page of your book.
Unceasingly,
Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravirmayedhi, rudrayatte dakshinam mukham, tena mam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today we'll take a look at the life of Chaitanya. Chaitanya, sometimes he's known as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His birthday comes according to the lunar calendar in the coming week. And the song that we had in the beginning is actually based on his teachings. There is a beautiful Sanskrit verse, hymn, called 8 verses on the teachings of Chaitanya, Shikshashtakam in Sanskrit. And the song that we had is extracts teachings from that, some important teachings from that. So, one of the things that we see when we study the lives of these great ones, those whom we worship as incarnation, prophets, saviors, is we see some similarities in the lives of them, and then we see certain distinctive characteristics in their lives as well. For instance, we have seen in the life of in life of Jesus and life of Krishna, you find some amazing parallels, especially about the things that happened in their childhood and so on. Some similar parallels can be found in the lives of Chaitanya and Ramakrishna. Chaitanya was born in the 15th century. So we find some great similarities in their lives as well. And in fact, in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, in his conversations, again and again, we find references to Chaitanya. He was born in the year 1486, so that's now more than 500 years ago, on a lunar eclipse day at Mayapur, a town in the town of Navadvip, which is in the bank of the Ganges in north of Calcutta. The name of the district is Nadia. His father's name was Jagannath Mishra, who was a learned Pandit, and his mother's name was Shachi. At that time, 500 years ago, Navadvip was a great center for trade and learning, and especially in the system of logic known as Navya Nyaya in those days. Chaitanya was the 10th child. So first 8 were daughters that were born to Jagannath Mishra and his wife, and all of them died in their infancy. And especially in the early days, especially in the Middle Ages, we know that the infant mortality rate was much, much higher than it is today. So the first 8 daughters, all of them died in their infancy. Then they had a son named Vishwarup, and then he was the youngest of them all, this Chaitanya, when he was born. He was, as a baby, and I have mentioned this on earlier occasions, in many of the Hindu households, after a baby is born, one of the first things they do is draw up the horoscope. And after, according to their astrological calculations, sometimes they will say, name the baby beginning with this letter. So there will be some horoscope name. Horoscope name is meant a name suggested by when the horoscope was drawn. And so that name, the baby was called Vishwambhara. But his mother named him Nimai. Now there is a reason why she named him Nimai. Literally, the word Nimai means short-lived. And it points to some of you must have heard of the tree called neem tree. It has a fruit which has a very bitter taste. And there is a belief in some parts of India that when if there has been some kind of a calamity or some, like there's lots of deaths in the family, then they would name the new baby with some undesirable association. So for instance, this undesirable association with a bitter fruit. The idea is with that no further calamities will occur in that family. And so that is why his mother used to call him Nimai. And he had a very handsome appearance and a very shining complexion. And so they called him Gauranga. Gauranga literally translated would mean the golden complexioned one, very fair in appearance. And then later on, when he embraced monastic life, he was given the name Sri Krishna Chaitanya. That is how he popularly became known as Chaitanya. So you see a string of names that he has had. As we see in the lives of many of these great ones, as a child, he was extremely naughty and also very short-tempered. But he had a very pleasing personality nevertheless. So he was loved very much by everyone in his neighborhood. And then we see, again, some of these things are like common that we read in the lives of these great religious teachers. So in his case also, we see that before his birth, both his parents had some dreams of some divine, with signifying something very wonderful is going to happen in their family. Again, showing that a great person was going to be born in their family was somehow, you see these signs of it in many different ways. And then there are some incidents in his life which again show that he was not an ordinary child. One of the things that we see when we study these lives is the history and myth kind of get mixed up. And it's not always easy to separate out what actually happened and then what were the stories that grew around that personality. And it's not always necessary either, because even though some stories might grow or develop or evolve around these personalities, those stories have a kernel of truth in it. They highlight certain essential characteristic in that person's life, which can be confirmed at least by the tools that are available to us. So one of the stories that I found interesting, and some of you may have read this, was that when he was a little baby, two people, they kidnapped him. Apparently he had some valuables, maybe some kind of a jewelry or something. Anyway, they kidnapped him, and as they were taking, this boy was and they offered him some sweets to kind of lure him away. And he nicely ate those sweets, and he sat on their shoulders and just walked away with them. And as they entered the nearby forest, it seems, we are told that they just lost their way. And they kept on searching, finding, and ultimately they came out of the forest and right in front of his own home. And then he gets out and then runs towards his parents. And his parents have been searching for him all along. And they are so happy. And these kidnappers like, oh my God, we are back to from where we started. And then they escaped. So there are some incidents like this in his childhood. Looking at his life, kind of a long, short view of his life, we see that there are certain 3 or 4 major conversions, if you like, or transformations that occurred. And to some extent, we see that every life, there will be some major changes occurring. Not all of them need not necessarily be very spiritual in the case of all, but even in our own lives, we will see that, right, if we just take a long-term view at our own lives up to this point, it might be possible to mention 2 or 3 or 4 some pivotal moments in our lives when it's like almost like a quantum jump, that something changed or some some transformations occur. And oftentimes it occurs in the lives of most people when we have to take certain major decisions in life. That could be about when you choose a career, when you choose your life's partner, when you choose to move from one job to another, and so on. So these are some of the kind of key moments which define our life. In the case of a spiritual seeker, also some of these key moments occur. And even in the case in our own life, we will see that the occasion that made us turn to spiritual life in a serious way, well, that was one of the key moments. Some of us may have been drawn very intensely to spiritual life from childhood, but for many of us, for most of us, it occurs at some stage in life. Now that's a great turning point. So similarly, again, as we advance in our spiritual life, there will be some experiences that come which can be seen as kind of quantum jumps. So something like that happened in Chaitanya's life as well. His older brother, who was Vishwarup, his name was, he was around 8 or 10 years older than him. He is very quiet, very learned, unlike his younger brother, who was very naughty. The older brother was really, well, like most elder brothers are. I don't know, I'm just making too broad a generalization. Anyhow, so he developed a great spirit of renunciation and became a monk and left. And that was a big shock to their parents, because they really, obviously, they loved him. He was their eldest child, and they were looking up to him to kind of take care of the family as the parents were getting older. But he suddenly left, and then that brought about a great change in this young Nimai, and he became a very serious after that. He stopped playing his pranks, and he started taking greater interest in his studies, and he was brilliant. He became actually a great Pandit. So great Pandit that he started later on. After he finished his graduated, he became a great Sanskrit grammarian, also philosopher, and started his own school. Then, after a few years, a great second big turning point occurred in his life when he visited Gaya. Gaya is another holy place of pilgrimage in India, and it has a big temple of Vishnu there, and it's specially known because many people visit that place to do the make offerings to their ancestors. There are several ceremonies that occur when there is a death in the family, and among the ceremonies is an annual offering that's done to the departed ancestors. And it is believed that if you go to Gaya and make an offering there, then that's considered so powerful, so sacred, then you are exempted from having to do this annual offerings. So anyhow, so many people who can make that pilgrimage to that place go specially to make these kind of offerings. So when, after his father died, when he was very young, he went to Gaya, the Nimai, to make that sacred offering in that temple of Vishnu. Now, standing before the deity there, he had this second big turning point occurred. His heart became so filled, his heart was overflowing with love for God to such an extent that he lost consciousness. And he was about to fall down when an ascetic who was standing nearby, his name was Ishwar Puri, came and supported him. Now that Ishwar Puri was a great saint, and just the touch of that saint brought about a big change in Nimai's life. It is said that as a result of that, all his pride in his scholarship went away, and he asked Ishwar Puri to show him the way to the realization of Krishna, who was his chosen deity. A few days later, Ishwar Puri then initiated Gauranga or Nimai with the Krishna mantra, and after that, when Nimai returned to Navadvip, he could no longer teach. In fact, he closed down his school and he just started spending his time in chanting the name of God. That's how you remember the song that we did in the beginning, chant unceasingly the name of God. So that became the most important characteristic of his life and the most important teaching that we gave. We find, in fact, we find even in the, and it's something that has been emphasized a lot in the Eastern Orthodox Church about this pray unceasingly. Some of you have read that book, The Way of a Pilgrim. Might see somehow these are the kind of parallels. So you find that great similarity between the main teaching of Chaitanya, and then centuries ago was this teaching called pray unceasingly. You find a great similarity there. A third conversion, a third turning point occurred in Chaitanya's life when, as a result of this continuously chanting the name of God, repeating the name of God, he underwent such great transformation that he entered what is sometimes called Radha's Bhava. But in the devotional schools, they have kind of made categorization of the kind of symptoms we see in the lives of people whose hearts are filled with the love of God. So as devotion intensifies in our hearts, changes occur, internal and also external. And then I think there are some, like, if I remember correctly, there are like 18 characteristics that some of them have enumerated, which can occur in that when the heart is completely overwhelmed. That's like considered the extreme. It cannot go beyond that. And that kind of love was seen in the life of Radha, the companion of Krishna. And so that is called Mahabhava. So it's not just an ordinary ecstasy, it's a supreme ecstasy. And it is said that all the great devotees who came after that, some of them have demonstrated, or in their life we saw a few of these characteristics. So depending on, and then, well, as is human nature, we then tend to categorize and say, well, so many characteristics are shown, so you are a devotee of this level and so on. And so Radha is considered like the height. She is the ideal, the goal before devotees. And so after Radha, in the devotional circles we read, it was in the life of Chaitanya that all the characteristics that were seen in the life of Radha, that extreme love for God, were seen next in the life of Chaitanya. And then 500 years later, almost 400 years later, we see in the life of Ramakrishna, when one of his teachers, Bhairavi Brahmani, she was the first one to identify and recognize that the same characteristics which were seen in the life of Chaitanya were seen in Ramakrishna's life as well. In fact, she had a big meeting of all the scholars invited for them to see and then verify and confirm whether these characteristics were present in his life as well. And then a fourth turning point occurred in Chaitanya's life when he was about 24 years old. A year after his visit to Gaya, was that time he was initiated into sannyasa, the final vows of monasticism, and by a monk named Keshav Bharati. And he gave the name to Nimai or Gauranga. He called him Sri Krishna Chaitanya. And as I said, that is how he later became popularly known as Chaitanya. Afterward, we see in his life, he did pilgrimage to many parts of India. He went down to the southern part of India as well. In Puri, he met with a great scholar called Sarvabhauma. And there is an interesting story associated with that. That the Sarvabhauma was a great scholar, and he Chaitanya asked to be taken as a student. He wanted to learn from Sarvabhauma. And then Sarvabhauma said, I want to test you first, whether you are fit to receive this highest teaching. And the test he gave was this. He asked him to take out his tongue and put a little bit of sugar on it. If you have not tried it, you can try it and see what happens. So obviously, there's always the saliva will immediately come out with the sugar. But it seems he wanted to test. He put the sugar and said, don't taste it. So, and then the sugar remained on his tongue with no this thing. It says even with a breeze, it could be blown away. And so then Sarvabhauma said, yes, you are fit to be a student with this such tremendous control over yourself. There's another one interesting story that's told, that he really had gone to study under this scholar, Sarvabhauma. And the text they were studying was Brahma Sutra, one of the fundamental, the basic texts of Vedanta. And so Sarvabhauma, the teacher, taught him for 3 days. The first 3 days, the earliest of those aphorisms. And Chaitanya just sat there with apparently a very blank face. And afterwards, this teacher had a doubt. Teacher asked him, are you following what I am saying? Because he didn't get any proper feedback. And so he asked, looking at Chaitanya, he asked him, are you able to follow what I am saying? And then Chaitanya, not sarcastically, just told him honestly the truth. He said, I'm able to follow what the book says, but I'm not able to understand your commentary on it. And then, of course, that we don't know what the teacher's reaction was, but we have to imagine it must have been a true seeker of knowledge, because rather than getting upset or angry, because this is not a very pleasant answer to hear for any teacher. But then he asked Chaitanya, you tell me what you have understood. And then when Chaitanya explained the same portion, the teacher said, you are my teacher. So it was a great reversal of roles. And that's an interesting thing to remember. One of the things that's often stressed is vidya dadati vinayam. True knowledge bestows humility. So knowledge is not about how many degrees you have or about how many books you have read, but has it truly made you humble? So we see this greatly honored, respected teacher called Sarvabhauma. As soon as he saw that here was someone who has come to learn from me, but his insight, his understanding, his maturity is so much more, he had no hesitation whatsoever in saying, I want to be your student. So you can see that's the hallmark of a true student, a real humility. Among the places that Chaitanya visited afterwards was also Vrindavan. Now Vrindavan, today of course, for most people who are aware of Krishna's place where Krishna's childhood Leela, as if it took place, may not be aware that until then, Vrindavan was a pretty insignificant village, just filled with cowherds and stuff, but no one even knew. People knew the stories of Krishna, but they had no idea where exactly this Vrindavan was. So it was only when Chaitanya visited that part and he had these mystic visions, and he was able to identify the actual spots where these different incidents from Krishna's life occurred. And that was when the whole face of Vrindavan changed. As I said earlier, we find in Ramakrishna's conversations a lot of references to Chaitanya. And I would just like to read a few of them. So Ramakrishna, these are passages from the Gospel of Ramakrishna. So Sri Ramakrishna said, he's quoting Chaitanya. Chaitanya said, the name of God has very great sanctity. It may not produce an immediate result, but one day it must bear fruit. It is like a seed that has been left on the cornice of a building. After many days, the house crumbles and the seed falls on the earth, germinates, and at last bears fruit. Such was the emphasis both Chaitanya and Ramakrishna laid on God's name, that once we have received instructions from a teacher, once we have received a mantra, the potency of that name is so much that sooner or later it will bear fruit. It will bring about a change in our lives. Of course, if we consciously try to practice it, it will bring about much sooner than it otherwise would. But the power of that name, the power of that teaching will never be lost. Chaitanya once said to Nityananda, "Listen to me, brother, a person entangled in worldliness can never be free." This was another one important teaching of Chaitanya. Now, what does worldliness mean? Oftentimes we use the phrase worldly. What it means is this. What is of value to me in the world? And clearly, there are lots of things that we value in life. But we don't value everything equally. There are certain things more valuable as compared to certain other things. So there's always this kind of a gradation, a hierarchy. And the example that I often like to give is this. Let's say you bought a new phone, an iPhone, let's say. Well, tomorrow there's likely to release one new iPhone. So for many people, some of the new technological gadgets you may buy may be very valuable to you. But your life is valuable to you as well. So suppose one day you buy something new and shiny and you love it and you value it and you are returning home. And it's rather evening, it's rather secluded part, there aren't that many people on the road, and suddenly someone comes, sticks a knife to this thing and says, give to me everything that's in your pocket. And you have this great new phone that you bought. It's valuable to you, but what is the trade-off? It's either your life or your phone. I think most of us no one would say, "Oh, my phone is so precious to me, take away the life." Wouldn't make sense. So when both the things are of value, we say, well, my life is more valuable than the phone. So similarly, so who is a worldly person? So the world has some value. Now, a person for whom the world and everything in it has the highest value, that there is nothing higher than what is in the world, such a person is worldly. Now, how would that be distinguished from someone who we can describe as a religious person or a spiritual person? I think it should be very clear that if I see myself as religious or if I see myself as spiritual, then God or spirit would be of a higher value than the world. That doesn't mean the world loses its value. It just means that there is something more valuable than it. It also means, just like that example I gave earlier, if at all an occasion comes in life when I have to choose between the two, what will I choose? So if I have to choose between the world and the spirit, or world and God, a worldly person would choose the world. A spiritual person would choose God or spirit. I think that's the basic definition of who is spiritual and who is worldly. So I think that's a kind of a yardstick we can apply to ourselves and say, well, I am spiritual, but how much spiritual am I? How much valuable is my spiritual life to me as compared to other things of value in my own life? So that is what is meant here. Listen to me, brother. A person entangled in worldliness can never be free. So what Chaitanya is pointing out here is, if we want to be free in the truest sense of the term, right now we are already free in many ways. we already say we are in a free world. There is some amount of political freedom, economic freedom, social freedom. So yes, there is some freedom. It's not like we are not free at all. But none of us, can any of us claim that I am free in every respect? And no, we know that there are a lot of strings that are attached to us, which make us feel that we are not completely free, that there is bondage in many ways. Not the least of which is the bondage of our own desires and ambitions and our own negativities. There are certain things that we don't like about our own self, but we can't get rid of it. So there is a lot of bondage at the more subtler level. And so what Chaitanya is teaching here is that unless that worldliness, to the extent that worldliness departs from our heart, we can become more and more free. Now, yet another words of Ramakrishna, he said, the fire of Chaitanya, and I mentioned this actually, but this is what Ramakrishna also refers to. The fire of Chaitanya renunciation was so great that when Sarvabhauma poured sugar on his tongue, instead of melting, it evaporated into air. He was always absorbed in samadhi. How great was his conquest of lust. Here's another one. Chaitanya Deva set out once on a pilgrimage to southern India. One day he saw a man chanting the Gita. Another man, seated at a distance, was listening and weeping. His eyes were swimming in tears. Chaitanya Deva asked him, "Do you understand all this?" The man said, "No, revered sir, I don't understand a word of the text." "Then why are you crying?" asked Chaitanya. The devotee said, "I see Arjuna's chariot before me. I see Lord Krishna and Arjuna seated in front of it talking. I see this and I weep." I think it's a very profound anecdote, and there's so much to learn. So when we, for instance, study the Gita, right now we are studying Gita every Wednesday. Clearly we are studying the words, we are trying to see what those words mean, what do we learn, how we can practice. But what does learning from the Gita really mean? It's surely more than words. It's surely more than simply ideas. And that's what you see here. Here is this kind of an extreme case. So here is one person who understands nothing from the Gita, but just the awareness that this is a sacred teaching which was given by Krishna to Arjuna. And but just thinking of that, his heart is so filled with the presence of Krishna. He doesn't need words. So this is important. How important are words in spiritual life? How important is intellectual understanding in spiritual life? And we will see that some of the highest teachings are given without the use of words. There is a nice hymn called Dakshinamurti Stotra, and in that there is this one verse. Among these, the two lines are Gurostu maunam vyakhyanam shishyastu chinna samshayaha. So the scenario is this. The teacher is sitting under a tree, and in that hymn the teacher is described as a very young person. And all of his students, almost all of them older than that teacher in age, are sitting in front. And Maunam Vyakhyanam, the discourse that the teacher gave was silence. Not a word was spoken. And Shishyastu, and the students, Chinna Samshayaha, Samshayas mean doubts. So the discourse of the teacher was just silence. And all the doubts in the minds of the students were dispelled. So some of the highest teachings have been given in spiritual history, not through words, it's just through silence. Sometimes just through a look, sometimes just merely through a touch. Words are probably the least efficient way of teaching. And as if you want to kind of an elaboration of that, why is it least efficient? Because you can see it's not a very direct method of teaching. I mean, what happens? For instance, now, even when you study through lectures or conversations, etc., what is happening is this. So there are ideas, thoughts in the mind of the teacher, which are now being put into the form of words. Those words are uttered, a sound is produced, that sound is entering your ears, it's being interpreted by you, by your brain, so you understand the meaning of the words. When you understand the meaning, the corresponding idea then gets reflected in your head. So it's such an indirect way. It's thoughts getting into sound then again going back to ideas. You can bypass this whole chain reaction without using words at all, going straight. And sometimes that's why we speak about telepathy. Can the idea from my head go straight into your head without using any words? Modern education was once someone defined education as that mysterious process by which information passes from the professor's notes into the notes of the student without passing through the head of either of them. So that's just words. But the real teaching, you don't need words. And so that's something that needs to be taken into. So scholarship in the way we understand it, it's really all about, mostly about words. But knowledge, wisdom doesn't depend on words. Wisdom is one that can transform our life without. Now again, I'm not discounting the importance of education. I'm not saying that study or scholarship is bad or unimportant. That's not what I'm saying. All that I'm saying is none of us can say is that it's absolutely necessary. That without being a scholar, you cannot be spiritual. You cannot say that. We have this so many examples of great saints who by no stretch of imagination can be called scholars, who in fact would be considered totally illiterate. Ramakrishna himself hadn't studied any Upanishads or anything, and yet all the essence of these Vedantic teaching was manifest in his life. Chaitanya used to shed tears of joy at the very mention of Krishna's name, Ramakrishna says. Chaitanya embraced all, including the parayas. Parayas are the lowest category in the social setup in India of those days. What we call the Dalits. So he made no distinction. Ramakrishna, as some of you would have read in his books, said that devotees have no caste. That if a true devotee of God would not make any distinction neither in terms of one's caste, class, race, none of those things would matter. What would simply be that everyone is a child of God. And I think this is so important in the times in which we live, when all over the world we just see how much divisiveness has come from various factors. Sometimes it can be found politically beneficial to create this and incite this divisiveness in society. But if we develop this spiritual attitude to life, we will not make any difference. We will see that there is this one supreme being, one God, and if all of us truly are God's children, then just like a mother would not make a mother or any parent would not discriminate among their children. All their children are their children. So similarly, if we begin to see God as making God having favorites, then not much of a God. Vivekananda said, throw this God into the Pacific Ocean. One of the things that makes God God is that God loves all equally, since all are God's children. So if we are able to keep this in mind, then at least no matter what's happening in society outside, within our own hearts, we will be able to be free from these kind of distinctions, this kind of divisiveness. And finally, here is one last quote from Ramakrishna. He said, Chaitanya was intoxicated with the love of God. Still, before taking to monastic life, for how many days did he try to persuade his mother to give him her permission to become a monk? He said to her mother, don't worry, I shall visit you every now and then. And he did keep that promise. Because in the early days especially, someone from the family becoming a monk would mean that family has almost lost a child, which is exactly what happened in Chaitanya's older brother. Once he left home, the family never got to see him again. So he didn't die immediately, but as far as the family was concerned, he was not there. And so when Chaitanya wanted to take monastic life, obviously his father had passed away by then, mother was very reluctant. She said, I've already lost one son. I don't want to lose one more. And that time then he promised her, mother, he tried to persuade her and said, mother, whenever you need me, I will be there with you. And as I said, he did keep that promise. Among the teachings that we find in Chaitanya and also in Ramakrishna's life, these are, you could almost say, they are common things stressed by both of them. And among the first thing is the supremacy and independence of bhakti, the path of devotion. Sometimes, again, depending on one's own, the way one is oriented towards God, sometimes people tend to look down upon the path of devotion, thinking it's just blind faith. These are just believers. It just doesn't seem, at least philosophy or thinking about God rationally seems to have some kind of prestige connected with it. But just loves God, just weeps at the name of God. Sometimes people tend to look down upon that kind of a thing. And what Chaitanya and Ramakrishna later on showed through their own life, that if that love for God is genuine, it can be so transformative that itself can free you. That is not dependent on scholarship, not dependent on anything. The second thing that he stressed was the power of the divine name and importance of the chanting of God's name. Something that we do through the practice we call japa and the practice of music, singing. So the devotional music and repeating the mantra, or repeating or constantly praying, these are extremely powerful ways. Holy Mother Sharda Devi used to say, Japat Siddhihi, that is, through the practice of repetition of the mantra, one can become free. And so that was very much stressed by Chaitanya and Ramakrishna. And those amongst us who have, I think many of us who have been practicing this, repeating God's name and chanting and singing, will have noticed a transformation occurring. It may not be as dramatic as it occurred in the lives of many of these people. To whatever little an extent, we will see that our own lives have changed. There is something has moved within our heart as a result of this repeating God's name, as a result of praying, as a result of singing devotional music. A third important thing that we see in Chaitanya's life is the importance of morality and chastity. They both stressed it very much, that the spiritual life can be built on a strong foundation of a moral life. So the first thing is we must be moral. Only if we are moral, if we are truly ethical, can we hope to be spiritual. And so laying a special focus on the life of dharma, of honesty, truthfulness, unselfishness, that is very important even before we aspire to be spiritual. Fourth thing is service as worship. That helping other people in need is not simply a social work. A social work is a great thing. It's a great thing to do that. But that itself can be elevated to a form of spiritual practice. if we recognize that God is present in the hearts of all, then helping someone in need, rather than simply remaining an act of charity, can become worship. That you are worshipping the divine being, worshipping God who is coming to you in that form in a way that is appropriate at that time. And finally, and most importantly, God realization is the goal of life. And everything else that we do should be geared toward that supreme goal. And that's again, that's a call for us to reflect on the different goals that we have in our own life. Most of us, I would imagine, will not say, oh, I have this one goal in life. Most of us have a bunch of goals, which is okay. But again, just as we have this hierarchy about values, oftentimes we'll have hierarchy about goals. So among the many goals that I have, is God realization one of the many goals that I have? And if it is one of the many goals that I have, and if I have to list these goals in order of importance, where would this spiritual goal be? Now, if I see myself primarily as a spiritual person, then God realization will be that, or the first, will be the topmost goal. That will be like the ultimate goal. And then it's okay to have several other intermediate goals. The only condition would be these intermediate goals must be on the way to the spiritual goal. If they are in the opposite direction, then there's a problem. It's like you want to, let's say, drive from Boston to New York. And New York, let's say, is your ultimate goal. But you say, by the way, I would just like to visit Los Angeles on the way. Well, I mean, that's okay, but it's just going to take much longer for you to reach New York, right? So it's good to have these intermediate goals. So long as they are on the way, that's fine. In fact, having intermediate goals actually is helpful. Because if they are on the way, then you know, well, I've come now 20% closer, 30% or 80%, so on. So let's try this as an assignment. When you go home today, make a list of all the goals that you have. Some of these would be very short term, some of these would be long term, and then make an effort to list them according to importance. And try to see whether how many of these goals are in the same direction. And then, once you have this kind of a master copy of your goals, all that you need is to just tick them off one by one as you meet them. Life seems so simple when you do it, put it in a list. So we'll close today, but I would encourage you to, if you get a chance, to read more about Chaitanya, read especially a lot about his teachings. And as I said, when you read Ramakrishna's, that conversation, that book, Gospel of Ramakrishna, you'll find a lot of references to Chaitanya. And there is much we can learn. And we will learn more from it, not simply if we read it, but you read it a little bit and then try to see what relevance it has, if any, to your life at present. And if you find something like, yeah, this makes sense, or this is something I can practice, or at least I can make an effort to practice. Ultimately, as we saw in that instance of this person who didn't study the Gita much, but whose heart, who actually could see Krishna and who wept. So the test of our spiritual progress is not how many books you have read, but even though you may have read little, but you have tried to connect it to your life and try to practice it. Ultimately, as Swami Vivekananda was fond of saying, an ounce of practice is worth tons of theory. So whatever little reading you do, try to see what is practicable to you now, what is relevant to you now, and try to put it into practice. Because once you put something into practice, and once you're actually able to see that change occurring within you, the joy of seeing that improvement in your own heart, nothing else in life can bring you that kind of joy. And it's that joy that will sustain us in spiritual life. Otherwise, spiritual life can become rather monotonous, kind of boring, if it is just about just reading something and just doing something just because everyone says do it. But if you actually try to do even a little bit, practice it, and you find some change inside, it can be, that's the kind of encouragement we all need in life. And we will, as Chaitanya taught, chant unceasingly the name of God. Even if it is not unceasingly, even if it is ceasingly, chant that name of God ceasingly now and then. And even then, we will be able to see some great and wonderful changes happening in our own lives. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. We bow down to Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Next Sunday is Easter, so we'll have a special Easter service with Antar Yoga, readings, music, and also the birthday celebration for everyone born in the month of March. So that will be next Sunday. So all of you are welcome, and especially those who are born in the month of March. And if your friends are born in the month of March, bring them along, at least for next Sunday. And if they're not interested, tell them there's a very delicious cake. On Wednesday, we will continue with the study of the Gita. We're presently studying chapter 13. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue at 6 o'clock in the evening. So you're welcome for all of this program. Let's now conclude with a prayer on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.